Sometimes, the biggest lessons don't come from classrooms or books. They come from ordinary places, like a quiet little cafe on the corner of a sleepy street. To most people, Maple and Main Café was just another stop on their morning routine, a place for coffee, conversation, maybe a few moments of peace before the day began. But one morning, that peace was tested. It started with a simple order, a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and it turned into something much bigger, a moment that would test the patience, courage, and heart of everyone inside those four walls. Because that's how life works sometimes. It gives us a choice, to stay silent or to stand up, to look away or to look deeper. This is the story of one cafe, one manager, and one encounter that revealed just how powerful quiet courage can be. It's not a story about shouting. It's not a story about revenge. It's a story about respect, about what happens when kindness refuses to back down. So sit back, take a deep breath, and let me tell you what really happened. The day a racist customer refused to be served, and the manager flipped the entire script. It was a quiet morning at Maple and Main Café, the kind of place where regulars came not just for coffee, but for peace. The sunlight filtered through the large windows, painting soft patterns on the wooden tables. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon muffins. The staff moved with familiar rhythm, the hiss of the espresso machine, the soft laughter behind the counter, the faint jazz tune playing from a small speaker near the pastry shelf. And at the center of it all was Jordan, the cafe manager. Calm, kind, always ready with a warm smile. To most people, Jordan wasn't just a manager. They were the reason the cafe felt like home. Today seemed like any other day. Until it wasn't. Jordan arrived early, as always, checked the pastry case, greeted the baker, adjusted the good morning sign that hung slightly crooked near the door. Routine gave them peace. Every mug in place, every table wiped clean. The first customers drifted in, a college student, a construction worker, a young mom with her son. Jordan greeted each one by name. "Morning, Ella." The usual. "Hey, Tony, double shot today?" These little exchanges built the heart of the cafe. Familiarity, comfort, belonging. As Jordan watched the morning rhythm unfold, they didn't know that within the hour, this peaceful space would become the stage for something unforgettable. The bell over the door chimed again. A man walked in, mid-50s, neatly dressed, but with a sharp expression that didn't match the cafe's warmth. He looked around, frowning slightly, as if nothing was quite good enough. Jordan noticed, but said nothing. They believed everyone deserved kindness first. "Good morning, sir. What can I get you today?" The man hesitated. "Coffee, black, and make it quick." His tone was clipped, impatient. Jordan nodded, choosing patience over pride. As they turned to prepare his order, the man's eyes followed one of the baristas, Amira, a young woman with kind eyes and a hijab that matched her green apron. That's when the shift began, subtle, almost invisible at first. But Jordan felt it. The kind of energy that tightens a room, even before words are said. Amira handed him the cup with a smile. "Here you go, sir. Careful, it's hot." He looked at her, then at the cup. His expression hardened. "Did you make this?" "Yes, I did." He paused, eyes narrowing. "I'd like someone else to make it. Someone who understands how to do it right." The room went silent, just for a second, but long enough for the hum of the coffee machine to sound too loud. Amira blinked, unsure. I followed the order, sir. Black coffee, no sugar." The man sneered. "I said someone else." You people always get it wrong. Jordan's heart sank. Not again, they thought. They had seen tension before, but this was different. It wasn't about coffee. It was about who made it. And suddenly, every eye in the cafe turned to Jordan. Jordan stood behind the counter, motionless for a heartbeat. They could feel the mix of confusion and fear from their staff, especially from Amira. The man waited, arms crossed, expecting agreement. But Jordan didn't rush. They took a breath. In moments like this, silence speaks before words ever do. Finally, Jordan stepped forward, calm, controlled, but firm. "Sir," they began softly, "our team members are trained to the same standard. Amira did nothing wrong." The man frowned, clearly not used to being told, "No." "Well, maybe you should train her better. I don't like being served by—" He stopped himself, but the venom in his tone finished the sentence for him. The cafe felt colder now. Even the music seemed to fade. Jordan knew this was more than a customer complaint. This was a choice, one that would define not just their leadership, but the soul of this place. Jordan smiled, but it wasn't a smile of agreement. It was the calm before a storm. "Sir," they said gently, "I think you might want to sit down for a moment. I'd like to talk to you about something." The man looked surprised, even irritated. "I didn't come here for a talk." "No," Jordan replied. "But you might leave with one." The staff exchanged glances. The customers leaned in slightly. Something was happening, something quiet, but powerful. Jordan's voice stayed level, almost soothing, but there was a weight beneath it. "Sometimes," they said, "the problem isn't the coffee. It's what we bring to the counter." The man didn't respond. But he didn't leave, either. And in that fragile moment, one heartbeat between conflict and understanding, the story began to shift. Amira stood still, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped the counter. The man looked confused, perhaps even unsettled by the unexpected calm. Jordan didn't break eye contact. They spoke softly again. "This cafe serves everyone, with respect. That's the rule we live by." Outside, the world went on, cars passing, sunlight glinting on glass, but inside something invisible had changed. No one could name it yet, but everyone could feel it. And by the end of that day, no one in Maple and Main Café would ever forget what happened next. The morning light was soft, the kind that made the cafe glow from the inside out. The scent of baked pastries filled the air, mixing with the slow rhythm of coffee being poured. Every table had its story. At one corner, an elderly couple shared their usual tea and crossword puzzle. Near the window, a group of students laughed quietly over laptops and half-eaten muffins. And at the counter, Jordan, the manager, moved like someone who belonged exactly where they were meant to be. "Morning, everyone," they said, checking on the pastry display. "Fresh batch of croissants, first come, first served." A few customers smiled and waved. It wasn't just a cafe. It was a community with walls made of warmth and routine. Jordan often said that cafes were more than places to drink coffee. They were places where stories met each other halfway. That morning, Maple and Main Café felt like the safest corner of the world, and no one yet sensed that this peace was fragile. Jordan's team wasn't just staff. They were family. There was Amira, the quiet perfectionist, always early, always smiling. She had joined the cafe 2 years ago, bringing her calm spirit and her love for caramel lattes. Then there was Luis, the jokester, a culinary student who treated every cappuccino like an art project. His foam hearts were famous. And Maya, the newest member, young and eager, learning how to balance trays without spilling milk on anyone's laptop. They were different in every way: backgrounds, languages, stories, yet somehow they worked in perfect rhythm. Jordan often said, "We don't just serve drinks here. We serve peace of mind." And every morning, they meant it. Before running Maple and Main, Jordan had worked in larger cafes, the kind that cared more about speed than souls. But after years of watching kindness fade in the rush of orders and deadlines, they decided to build something smaller, something slower, something human. They poured every bit of savings into this little corner cafe, painted the walls themselves, and hired people who believed that kindness was a skill, not a slogan. Every week, Jordan held short meetings where they reminded the team, "We can't control who walks through that door, but we can control who we are when they do." Those words had carried them through everything: bad weather, late nights, broken machines, and difficult customers. But even those words would be tested soon, because sometimes life doesn't knock before it enters. By 9:30 a.m., the cafe had its familiar buzz. Regulars filled their favorite spots like clockwork. Mr. Thompson, the retired teacher who corrected grammar on napkins for fun. Ella, the art student who paid with coins and sketches. Nadia, the nurse who always rushed in for an espresso before her shift. They were all part of the rhythm. Jordan knew every face, every favorite drink, every story that came with it. The cafe wasn't just open, it breathed. Every smile, every shared laugh, every "see you tomorrow" stitched the day together. If peace had a soundtrack, it would have been the clinking of cups and the low hum of conversation at Maple and Main. But not every customer carried the same warmth. Once in a while, a man named Mr. Harlan stopped by. He was polite, almost overly so, but his politeness felt heavy, like it came with conditions. He never smiled. He never tipped. And though he said little, his glances sometimes said too much. Amira had noticed it first, the way he looked at her with quiet disapproval, as if her presence offended something unspoken. Louise brushed it off. "Don't take it personal, Omi. Some people are just allergic to happiness." Jordan had noticed too, but chose patience. Because sometimes the best way to change a person's view is to keep showing them the truth: kindness, consistency, and respect. But that morning, Jordan felt something different. When Mr. Harlan walked by the window, not yet entering, just passing, Jordan's stomach tightened for a reason they couldn't explain. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Later that morning, during a short break, Amira joined Jordan at the corner booth. Steam rose from their mugs as sunlight framed them both in gold. "You ever feel like some people walk in carrying storms?" Amira asked softly. Jordan smiled faintly. "All the time. The trick is not to let them rain on you." Amira laughed. "Easy for you to say." "Not really," Jordan replied. "I just learned to carry an umbrella made of patience." They sat quietly for a while. In the background, Luis joked with a customer, Maya balanced a tray, and the bell over the door chimed in its usual friendly tone. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect. By noon, the cafe was alive with noise, chatter, laughter, and the comforting clatter of mugs. The radio played a mellow tune. The smell of warm bread drifted from the oven. And yet, beneath the peace, there was a strange stillness, the kind that only hindsight recognizes. Jordan glanced around, proud and grateful. This cafe was everything they had dreamed of, a place where differences didn't divide people, but brought them closer. They smiled at their team, unaware that the next customer to walk in would test everything they believed in. Sometimes, Jordan thought, watching sunlight flicker across the floor, even the calmest mornings can hide storms beneath. And with that thought, That quiet premonition, the story took a breath. Before the storm began. The cafe was in its familiar rhythm when the door chimed again. The sound was ordinary, but somehow it sliced through the calm like a note that didn't belong in the song. Mr. Harlan stepped inside. His eyes scanned the room, sharp and judgmental, as though measuring who was worth his attention. He moved slowly to the counter, his shoes clicking against the tile, the sound echoing louder than it should have. Amira, ever kind, greeted him first. "Good morning, sir." "The usual?" she asked with a soft smile. He gave a small grunt, not quite a yes, not quite a no. His expression said enough. Around him, the cafe carried on, mugs clinking, music playing, laughter from the back table. But Jordan, from the register, felt that familiar heaviness settle in the air. Amira prepared his drink the same way she always did. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. She handed it over with steady hands and her usual warmth. "Here you go, sir. Freshly brewed." Mr. Harlan took the cup, stared at it for a moment, and then, without tasting it, set it back on the counter. "I said black coffee." Amira blinked, confused. "Yes, sir. It is." He frowned deeper, his lips curling slightly. "Doesn't look right." His voice was sharp, not loud yet, but cutting like a blade dipped in ice. Louise looked up from the milk steamer, sensing something off. The chatter in the room dimmed by a fraction. Amira, still calm, offered, "I can remake it for you if you'd like." He crossed his arms. "No. I just don't like how you people make it." The words landed like glass breaking quietly in the background. A few customers froze mid-sip. One woman's hand trembled slightly as she set her cup down. Jordan's heart dropped. They had hoped this man's last visit was just a bad day. It wasn't. Jordan stepped forward slowly, the practiced calm on their face now holding something else. Quiet authority. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan. Is there an issue with the coffee?" He turned toward Jordan, his tone clipped. "Yes. I want it done properly." Jordan nodded. "I understand. Amira's one of our best baristas. She followed the recipe." Harlan's gaze flicked toward Amira again. "I don't care if she's your best. I said I don't want her making my drink." That "her" wasn't just a word. It carried centuries of weight. A silence spread, thick and uncomfortable. The cafe that once buzzed with life now felt like a room holding its breath. Amira's hand brushed against the counter, fingers trembling. She didn't look up. Her eyes were wet, not with tears, but with restraint. Louise whispered to Maya, "Is this really happening?" Maya just shook her head. It's strange how people freeze when something wrong happens right in front of them. Some looked away. Some pretended to check their phones. One older man in the corner shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. No one wanted to make it worse. But silence, in moments like this, speaks louder than shouting ever could. Jordan noticed it all. The fear, the discomfort, the invisible line dividing the room. They knew this moment would be remembered, not just for what was said, but for what wasn't. Amira whispered, "It's okay. I'll just—" But Jordan raised a hand slightly, stopping her gently. "No, Amira. It's not okay." The cafe fell even quieter. Even the coffee machine seemed to hesitate before hissing again. Mr. Harlan's face tightened. "Are you telling me how to talk in your own cafe?" Jordan met his gaze calmly. "I'm asking you to show the same respect you're being given." He laughed, a small, dismissive sound. "Respect goes both ways. Maybe you should train your people better." Jordan's voice stayed level, but their tone shifted. Amira is part of this team. We treat everyone equally here. That's our policy, and our promise. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them. Pride on one side, principle on the other. Jordan knew they were standing on a line. One wrong move could turn this into chaos, but one right move could turn it into change. Mr. Harlan reached for the cup again. His hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from anger he didn't know how to control. He muttered under his breath, "Should have gone to a proper place." Luis took a step closer, jaw tight. "Sir, we're all just trying to work here." Jordan gave him a subtle look. "Stay calm. This wasn't about pride anymore. It was about control, emotional control, moral control, human control." Jordan leaned slightly forward, keeping their voice soft but unyielding. "Sir, we're happy to make you another cup, but not at the cost of disrespect." The man's jaw clenched. "Are you refusing me service?" Jordan didn't flinch. "No. I'm refusing to ignore someone being insulted." That line, delivered gently, but with power, hung in the air like thunder about to break. From the corner, a voice spoke. A woman, middle-aged, firm but calm. She didn't do anything wrong. A few others nodded quietly. Someone murmured, "He's out of line." For the first time, the silence cracked. And that crack, small as it was, let in light. Mr. Harlan looked around, realizing the crowd wasn't with him. His expression shifted from anger to defensiveness. "I just want a coffee, not a lecture." Jordan replied softly, "Then have your coffee. But you'll get it from the same hands that made it before. Because those hands do good work." Amira stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure whether to feel fear or gratitude. The room waited, holding its collective breath. Harlan's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. You people think you can shame me." Jordan's voice dropped lower, not threatening but steady. "No. We're trying to remind you what respect feels like." The cafe was silent except for the sound of his breathing, short, angry, unsettled. For a moment, it looked like he might shout, or leave, or throw the cup. But he didn't. He just stood there, trembling with the kind of anger that comes from being challenged by calm. Jordan's eyes never left his. Everyone watched. The staff, the regulars, the strangers. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. But it was real. And in that stillness, power began to shift. Harlan finally muttered, "You'll regret this," and turned toward the door. But Jordan spoke before he could leave. "Wait." The word stopped him cold. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. "Before you go," Jordan said, voice even softer now, "I think there's something you need to hear." The man hesitated, hand on the door. The entire cafe leaned into the silence. Jordan's next words came with the weight of calm truth, the kind that cuts deeper than anger ever could. But the manager wasn't going to let this end the usual way. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. The door hung half open. The air inside the cafe felt thick, not from heat, but from tension that still hadn't found an ending. Mr. Harlan stood frozen near the threshold, torn between leaving and defending his pride. Amira stood by the counter, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed on the floor. Jordan finally exhaled. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't move quickly. Instead, they spoke with the kind of calm that makes people listen without meaning to. "Mr. Harlan," Jordan said quietly, "can we talk for a second?" The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't afraid. It was steady. and that steadiness was more powerful than shouting could ever be. Harlan hesitated, then turned slowly. "I already said what I needed to say." "Then let me say what needs to be said," Jordan replied. Jordan stepped out from behind the counter, not to confront, but to connect. Each step was deliberate, their posture open, their voice still soft. Everyone watched as they moved closer, not invading space, but reclaiming peace. "You come here often," Jordan began. "You've been a regular for months now." Harlan said nothing. Jordan continued. "You've seen us, the same faces, same smiles, same service. We've always treated you with respect." A pause. "Would you agree with that?" Harlan's jaw worked. "I guess." Jordan nodded once. "Then I need you to understand something important. Respect doesn't change depending on who pours your coffee." The cafe stayed silent, the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that forces people to think, even when they don't want to. Jordan's tone never changed. Calm, even. But each word landed like a quiet truth that couldn't be ignored. Jordan didn't want to humiliate the man. That wasn't the goal. They wanted him to see. They took a small breath. "You look like someone who's worked hard for what he has," they said. "Someone who's been through life long enough to know how people deserve to be treated." That caught him off guard. His face softened slightly, just for a moment. Jordan went on. "So I have to ask, if someone spoke to your daughter, or your sister, or your friend the way you just spoke to Amira, would that sit right with you?" He didn't answer. The question didn't need one. Jordan wasn't scolding. They were inviting reflection, the kind that sits heavy in the chest and lingers longer than anger. The cafe watched, captivated. Every word felt slower, more deliberate, more personal. Mr. Harlan broke the silence first. "You don't understand," he muttered. Jordan tilted their head slightly. "Then help me understand." He hesitated. "People like me, we get looked at like we're the bad ones now, like we can't say anything without being judged." Jordan nodded slowly, acknowledging the pain behind the defensiveness. "I hear you," they said. "Nobody wants to feel attacked." "But, Mr. Harlan, that's exactly what Amira felt, just now." The man's eyes flickered toward Amira for the first time since the incident began. She didn't look back. She was busy wiping the counter, trying to keep her composure. "Respect," Jordan continued, "isn't about who deserves it most. It's about who chooses to give it first." The words floated through the air, settling in the quiet like dust in sunlight. Even the bystanders felt it, a shift, subtle but real. Jordan took one more step forward, close enough to be heard clearly, far enough to leave space. They crossed their arms gently, not in defense, but in steadiness. "You can leave now if you want," Jordan said softly. "But if you do, you'll walk away thinking this place turned against you. And that's not true." Harlan frowned. "Then what is true?" Jordan's voice dropped just slightly, intimate, honest. "The truth is, everyone here still wants to serve you, still wants to welcome you. But we also need you to see that kindness only works when it's shared." He blinked, uncertain. The anger that once fueled him was cooling into confusion. Jordan pressed on gently. "You don't have to like everyone, sir. But you do have to respect them when you step through that door." Another pause. A breath. A heartbeat that hung between pride and realization. The cafe remained quiet, every ear tuned to this quiet exchange. Mr. Harlan looked down at his coffee cup. For the first time, he seemed unsure of what to do. He mumbled, "I didn't mean anything personal." Amira finally looked up, her voice small but steady. "It felt personal, sir. That one line, soft, honest, cut deeper than any confrontation could. Jordan didn't move. They let the silence do the work. It was the kind of silence that lets guilt breathe, that makes a person confront themselves. Mr. Harlan shifted his weight, uncomfortable. His defenses were cracking, not because someone shouted at him, but because no one did. Jordan finally spoke again, this time more like a guide than a manager. "Mr. Harlan," they said, "this cafe isn't perfect. None of us are. But we try to make this a place where everyone can belong, even people who might not always understand each other." He said nothing, but his face softened. Jordan went on, "If you ever feel unwelcome, you can tell me. I'll listen. But I won't let anyone else feel that way under my roof either." It was a balance, accountability and compassion, perfectly held in one sentence. The room seemed to breathe again, tension easing just slightly. Luis nodded quietly behind the counter. A few customers exchanged small, relieved glances. The energy was shifting, not completely, but enough to matter. Jordan didn't press further. They stepped back, folded their hands gently, and let stillness reclaim the room. No victory speech. No dramatic exit. Just calm, deliberate, powerful calm. Mr. Harlan stood there, staring at the floor, his coffee cooling on the counter. Then, slowly, he nodded. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something close. He picked up the cup. This time, he didn't complain. He took a sip, set it down, and muttered, almost to himself, "It's fine." Jordan gave a single nod. "It usually is." A faint ripple of quiet smiles spread through the cafe, not amusement, but relief. Something had shifted, invisible, but undeniable. Mr. Harlan started to turn toward the door again, still quiet, still processing. Jordan let him go. Sometimes, people need to leave to start understanding. But as he reached for the handle, Jordan spoke once more, softly, almost gently. "Mr. Harlan," they said, "you're always welcome here. But next time, let's make sure everyone feels that way." He paused, nodded without turning around, and left. The door closed behind him with a small, final chime. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, conversations returned. The cafe began to breathe again. Amira turned to Jordan, her voice quiet. "How did you stay so calm?" Jordan smiled. "Because anger only teaches anger. But calm makes people listen." She nodded, her eyes softening. "You think he'll come back?" Jordan glanced toward the door. "I think he'll think about it," they said. "And that's a start." The cafe returned to its usual rhythm, but underneath the surface, everyone felt it. Something meaningful had just happened. Something that wasn't over yet. And though the tension had faded, the story was far from finished. Because the manager wasn't done flipping the script. Not yet. 2 days later, the cafe returned to its normal rhythm, or at least it tried to. But some silences linger even after the noise comes back. Amira smiled as she worked, but there was still a quiet in her eyes. Luis cracked jokes, trying to lift the air, but even laughter felt cautious. And Jordan? They noticed everything. They'd hoped Mr. Harlan wouldn't return. But deep down, they knew he would. People like him, people who feel challenged, often come back. Not for coffee, but for control. That morning, as the door chimed and the same familiar shoes crossed the floor, Jordan simply sighed. Here we go again. Mr. Harlan stood at the counter. But something was different. His tone wasn't sharp. His shoulders weren't tight. He looked uncertain. "Morning," he muttered. Amira hesitated, glancing at Jordan. Jordan gave a small nod. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan." "The usual." He nodded once. "Yeah, the usual." There was no hostility in his voice, only discomfort. The kind that comes from realizing you were wrong, but not knowing how to say it out loud. Amira began preparing the coffee. Her movements were steady, deliberate. The café, though busy, felt aware. Everyone sensed something important was happening. When she placed the cup in front of him, he didn't speak. He stared at it, as if the cup held more than just coffee, maybe guilt, maybe understanding. Jordan waited, and then he said quietly, "It's fine. Thank you." The room didn't react, but everyone felt it. A shift, small but powerful. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something close. Jordan approached, slow and calm. "I'm glad you came back." Harlan gave a short laugh. "Not sure why I did." "Maybe because you wanted to try again," Jordan said. He looked up, surprised. "Try what again?" "Respect," Jordan replied gently. For a moment, Harlan looked like he might get defensive, but the tone disarmed him. "I didn't come here for a lesson," he muttered. "I didn't plan to give one," Jordan said. "But sometimes the world hands us second chances, whether we're ready or not." The café was quiet, but listening. Even the sound of the milk steamer seemed to pause. Harlan sighed. "You know, I wasn't always like that." Jordan tilted their head. "Then you already know who you can be." Jordan gestured toward the café. "Do you see them?" they asked softly. Harlan looked around. Students, workers, neighbors, different faces, different stories, all quietly watching. "These people," Jordan continued, "come from everywhere. They speak different languages, pray in different ways, love different people. But here, none of that matters." Harlan frowned. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," Jordan said. "It's just not always easy." The line lingered, soft, but sharp enough to stay in the mind. Jordan took another step forward. "Mr. Harlan, when you refused Amira's service the other day, you didn't just hurt her. You reminded everyone in this room how fragile kindness can be." He blinked, swallowing hard. Jordan's tone never rose, but every word landed heavier than the last. "And now," they added, "you have a chance to repair that." Jordan turned slightly to Amira. "Would you be willing to show him how you make the coffee?" The café froze. Amira blinked, caught off guard. "Show him." Jordan nodded gently. "Yes. Show him the care you put into it. Let him see what respect looks like, not just taste it." Harlan stared, confused. "What's this supposed to do?" Jordan smiled faintly. "You'll see." Amira hesitated, but Jordan's calm gave her courage. She began explaining her process softly, step by step. The grind, the water temperature, the timing. Her hands moved with practiced grace. Every motion was intentional, gentle, almost meditative. "This," she said quietly, "is how I make coffee for everyone." When she handed him the finished cup, the silence in the café was profound, not tense, but reverent. Harlan took the cup, looked at her, and for the first time he really saw her, not as someone behind a counter, but as a person. He whispered, "It's good." Amira smiled softly. "It usually is." A few people smiled. Luis exhaled quietly, grinning to himself. That small exchange, barely a few words, felt like the release of held breath. Someone in the corner clapped once. Just once. Then stopped, embarrassed. Jordan smiled gently. "No need to clap. Just remember what you saw." And they did. Everyone in that cafe that morning would remember. Not because of what was said, but because of what was shown. It wasn't about shaming anyone. It was about showing how empathy disarms hatred more powerfully than anger ever could. The cafe returned to its usual hum, but with a softness it hadn't had before. Customers who didn't know each other began talking. A stranger held the door open for another. And when Amira passed a table, someone said quietly, "Great coffee, by the way." Little ripples. Big meaning. Later, when things calmed, Jordan leaned against the counter beside Amira. "You did good," they said softly. She smiled. "I was shaking the whole time." "Courage doesn't mean you don't shake," Jordan replied. "It means you pour the coffee anyway." They both laughed quietly. Across the room, Harlan sat at a corner table, alone with his thoughts. He didn't leave right away this time. He just sat, staring into his cup, then at the people around him. He saw something different now. He saw unity where he once saw division. And maybe, just maybe, a bit of peace. As Harlan stood to leave, he walked slowly to the counter. Amira turned, surprised to see him still there. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to say, thank you. For the coffee." His voice was low, awkward, but real. Amira nodded gently. "You're welcome." He hesitated, then added, "And I'm sorry. For the other day." She didn't smile out of victory. She smiled out of understanding. "Apology accepted," she said softly. He nodded once more, eyes downcast, and left. The bell over the door chimed again, the same sound that had started everything. But this time, it didn't sound sharp. It sounded like closure. Jordan watched him go, then turned to their staff. No one said a word. There was nothing to say, because the lesson had already been written, not in speeches, but in small acts of grace. Jordan finally whispered, half to themselves, "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just looks like kindness that refuses to bend." The cafe was still. No one clapped. But everyone felt something shift. The next morning, sunlight poured through the cafe windows. It wasn't just light. It was warmth, the kind that seeps into walls and hearts alike. Maple and Main smelled of fresh bread and roasted beans, as it always did. But today, the air carried something extra, peace. Amira was behind the counter again, moving with quiet confidence. Her smile was softer, but it reached her eyes this time. Luis hummed as he worked the steamer, filling the space with a small tune. Everything felt lighter, not because the world had changed overnight, but because they had. Jordan stood by the register, watching it all. The storm had passed, but the echoes of what happened still lived quietly in every corner of the cafe. Word spreads faster than coffee brews. By mid-morning, the regulars began whispering, not gossip, but gratitude. "I heard what happened," said one of the regulars, Mrs. Linton. "Took courage to handle it that way." Jordan smiled modestly. "Just tried to do what felt right." Mrs. Linton nodded. "Maybe more of us should." Nearby, two students talked softly over their laptops. "It's weird," one said. "You don't expect to see that kind of thing in a cafe." "Yeah," the other replied. "But the way they handled it. I'll be honest, I learned something." These little ripples, conversations, realizations, quiet nods, became part of the cafe's new rhythm. No big speeches. No social media fame. Just change, happening quietly, the the way real change often does. Later that afternoon, Amira took a break by the window. She looked out at the street, the same view as always, but somehow brighter. For days she had carried the weight of that moment, the words, the stares, the silence. But now, that weight felt lighter. Jordan sat beside her with 2 cups of tea. "You doing okay?" they asked. Amira nodded. "Yeah. Better than I thought I would." Jordan smiled. "You handled yourself with grace. That's not easy." She shrugged. "I didn't feel graceful at the time. I felt small." Jordan looked out the window too. "You didn't look small. You looked strong. Stronger than most people would be." She smiled, softly. "Maybe strength doesn't feel like strength when you're in it." Jordan nodded. "Exactly. Sometimes it feels like survival first. Strength comes after." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea as sunlight painted golden lines across the floor. For the first time in a long while, Amira didn't feel like she had to hide her quiet. It wasn't silence anymore. It was peace. Over the next few weeks, something subtle began to happen. New customers came in, some curious, some cautious. Regulars stayed longer, talked more, tipped better. The cafe had always been warm, but now it felt alive. Luis started a small chalkboard message near the door. He wrote, "Kindness served daily. No exceptions." Every morning, someone different added a quote, a note, or a small drawing beside it. One day, a child scribbled a heart. Another day, someone wrote, "Respect is the sweetest thing on the menu." The wall became a quiet symbol, not of division, but of unity. And Jordan, standing behind the counter, realized something important. They hadn't just run a cafe. They'd built a sanctuary, one that had survived the storm stronger than before. One late afternoon, long after the rush hour faded, the bell above the door chimed again. Jordan looked up, and froze for half a second. Mr. Harlan. He looked different this time, not just in clothes, but in energy. He walked slower, softer. His expression was no longer guarded. It was humble. He approached the counter. Amira was there, cleaning up. When she saw him, she straightened slightly but didn't flinch. "Evening," he said quietly. "You're still here." Amira smiled faintly. "Still here." He nodded. "That's good." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to say, I thought a lot about what happened." Jordan appeared beside her, calm as ever. Harlan continued, "I didn't like how it made me feel. Not the situation, me. I didn't like the person I sounded like." Jordan nodded slowly. "Reflection can be uncomfortable, but it's where real change begins." He looked at Amira. "You didn't deserve that. I'm sorry." She met his eyes and said softly, "Thank you." He left without ordering anything. But when the door closed, the silence he left behind wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean. Redemption doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs a doorway and the courage to walk through it again. In the following days, laughter returned to Maple and Main. Luis teased Maya for spilling milk. A couple celebrated their anniversary at the same corner booth they'd met in. Even the old espresso machine, which sputtered more than it worked, became part of the charm again. Life moved forward. But there was something new in the way people greeted each other now, a gentleness, an awareness. They saw one another differently. Because once you witness injustice up close, you can't unsee it, and once you witness grace, you can't forget it. The cafe became known, quietly, as a place where everyone belonged. not because of signs or slogans, but because the people inside had lived it. One evening, as Jordan closed up, they turned off the lights except for the one by the window. They looked at the reflection of the cafe glass, the tables, the chairs, the chalkboard, the soft glow that framed the room. They whispered to themselves, "It started as a storm. But maybe storms don't destroy. Maybe they clear the air." Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a golden hue across the sign that read Maple and Main Café. Through the reflection, Jordan saw Amira sweeping near the counter, humming quietly. Luis was locking up the back door. The cafe wasn't just a business anymore. It was a story, one written not in words, but in choices. And Jordan realized, this wasn't just a cafe story. It was a mirror, a reminder that sometimes the smallest places hold the biggest lessons. They turned off the last light, smiled, and stepped outside into the evening air, calm, content, and changed. The day was ending. The light outside had softened to a golden hue, stretching long shadows across Maple and Main's wooden floors. Jordan stood behind the counter, wiping down the last table. The cafe was empty now, the kind of empty that feels peaceful, not lonely. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Outside, a light breeze carried the scent of rain, gentle, cleansing, familiar. Jordan paused, looked around the space, and smiled. This was where it had all happened, the day everything changed. But change, they realized, didn't come from chaos. It came from choice. Quiet choices. Consistent ones. The kind that no one notices until everything is different. They walked to the front window and gazed outside. The street was calm. People passed by with cups in hand, unaware of how much this little cafe had seen and taught. Jordan leaned against the counter, thinking back to that morning, to the tension, the silence, the courage it had taken to stay calm when everything inside screamed to react. They remembered Amira's trembling hands, Luis's protective stance, the way the room had gone cold, and then, slowly, how it warmed again. It felt distant now, like a memory wrapped in fog. But it wasn't pain that lingered, it was pride. They whispered to themselves, sometimes the quietest people start the loudest revolutions. Because nothing about that day had been loud. No yelling, no fighting, no spectacle. Just words. And silence. And truth. The kind of revolution that happens in the heart, not on the streets. A soft knock on the counter broke Jordan's thoughts. Amira stood there, holding her apron in one hand. "Locking up?" she asked. Jordan nodded. "Almost." Amira smiled. "Feels peaceful tonight." "It does," Jordan agreed. "You did good this week." She looked down, shy but proud. "It's strange. I used to come here just to make coffee. Now it feels like more than that." "It is more," Jordan said. "You turned a moment of hate into something that made people better." Amira's eyes glimmered. "You think people really change?" Jordan paused. "I think they remember. And if they remember long enough, change follows." They both stood in silence, watching the light fade through the window. Some lessons don't need words. They just need to be shared, one quiet moment at a time. The next morning, the cafe reopened as usual. But to anyone paying attention, something had shifted forever. New faces came in, drawn not by advertising, but by word of mouth. People came for the coffee, yes, but they stayed for what the cafe represented. They saw it in the small gestures. A stranger helping another find a seat. A customer leaving an extra $1 in the tip jar. A quiet nod between two people who might never have spoken before. And Jordan realized, This was what healing looked like. Not in speeches or headlines, but in everyday grace. The cafe had become a reflection of something deeper. What happens when compassion meets courage and refuses to step aside? One afternoon, a small envelope appeared in the mail slot. No name on the front. Just the words, "For the manager." Inside was a folded note, handwritten in shaky pen. "I've been thinking about that day. I don't know if I'll ever get it all right, but I wanted to say, thank you for the lesson I didn't know I needed. Harlan." Jordan read the note twice, then placed it quietly inside the drawer beneath the counter. They didn't tell anyone. Some stories are meant to stay silent, their power living in what they change, not what they prove. Later that evening, Jordan sat by the window again. Sunlight pooled across the counter, turning the glass into a mirror. They could see their reflection, tired, maybe, but content. And in that reflection, they didn't just see themselves. They saw Amira's smile, Louis's jokes, Maya's nervous laughter, the faces of strangers who had become witnesses to something larger than coffee and conflict. They realized something then. The world doesn't change all at once. It changes one choice, one word, one act of grace at a time. And when one person chooses empathy over ego, others notice. That's how ripples become waves. That's how revolutions begin, quietly, softly, in places no one expects. Before locking up, Jordan looked toward the chalkboard near the door. Louis's idea, once filled with messages from customers. Someone had written in neat handwriting, "The world needs more cafes like this." Jordan smiled, picked up the chalk, and added beneath it, "The world just needs more people who care." Then they drew a small heart and set the chalk down. Outside, dusk settled over the town. Inside, the cafe glowed softly, a sanctuary of warmth in a world still learning. Jordan took one last look before switching off the lights. The reflection of the cafe shimmered faintly in the glass, still, peaceful, alive. As they stepped outside, Jordan turned to lock the door. The key clicked softly, a small, satisfying sound. They stood there for a moment, breathing in the evening air. Life was still messy. The world was still imperfect. But for now, there was peace. Because sometimes, peace isn't found in perfection. It's found in the moments when people choose to be better than they were yesterday. Jordan looked up at the cafe sign one last time and whispered, "The day everything changed me too." They smiled, turned, and walked away as the night settled in. Calm, endless, forgiving. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from down the street. And the story of Maple and Main Café, the story of courage, compassion, and quiet revolution, became another chapter in the book of human kindness. One manager, one act of calm courage, and one moment that turned strangers into witnesses of something extraordinary. The kind of quiet revolution that doesn't make headlines, but makes humanity a little better. Because real strength isn't in how loud we speak, but in how steady we stand. Real justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and when it does, it changes everything. Amira found her voice that day, not through anger, but through grace. Mr. Harlan found reflection, not through punishment, but through truth. And Jordan, the manager who refused to meet hate with hate, showed everyone that leadership isn't about power. It's about peace. Outside Maple and Main Café, the world kept moving. Cars passing, lights flickering, days blending into nights. But for the people who were there, something stayed with them. Something quiet. Something strong. Maybe you've been in a moment like that, when you could choose to react, or to rise. Maybe someday you will. And maybe this story will remind you that kindness, when it stands its ground, can move mountains, one small act at a time, because sometimes the quietest people start the loudest revolutions.